I would absolutely recommend this series to anyone, Gundam fan or otherwise.
This week on Nerd Legion, we are actually returning to contemporary content, although it comes from a franchise from the late 70s. We are going to be talking about Netflix's latest TV show for Gundam, which is Gundam Requiem for Vengeance, made in Unreal Engine 5 with, I would say, a mixed success that we will no doubt be discussing. It is short, guys. It's 6 episodes. It's kind of like a vignette in the Gundam universe. It's effectively a film. It's basically like a 2-hour-long movie.
Yeah, guess what? 6 20-minute episodes equals 2 hours. It is a 2-hour film that feels at times artificially chopped into 6 episodes because that's what Netflix does. They make series, right? So, but really it's a movie. Like if you're going to watch this right off the bat, I would say just sit down and watch the entire thing in one sitting. It's movie length. Watch it as a movie. Don't watch a couple episodes and come back. It'll be disjointed. Just watch the whole thing at once.
Yeah. And so this is a CG version. And yes, it was written by Americans and created by Americans, but in partnership with Sunrise. And so, you know, it does have the Japanese involvement as well. It was originally designed to be performed in English, right? But there's also a Japanese dub. DoA, I know you are a big Gundam fan. Now, I don't know anything about Gundam, so I'm basically coming into this. I think when I was a teenager, I saw a couple of episodes of like Gundam Wing and Gundam Seeds, but I don't remember them at all. Okay.
Yeah.
And I've never seen Mobile Suit Gundam, the original series from the late 70s, early 80s. I know you have. So tell me about your background in Gundam, and you can give the introduction to where this show lands in the timeline.
Okay. So our story begins in, I would say, what would be AD 2080 our time, but in the Gundam timeline is basically Universal Century 1. So basically, humanity overpopulates the Earth. Technology evolves, and in like 1999, I think it is, or something like that in the timeline, there's like a mini nuclear war in Europe and all that, and everyone's like, all right, we got to get off this planet. And so they do. And then when they do, they decide that AD isn't an appropriate way to measure years and time anymore, because now we're going to be in space. Everything is going to be much more, harder to keep track of than it is on just one planetary body. So they decide to go with Universal Century. So this show takes place in UC 79. So 79 years after humanity essentially leaves Earth in a big way and starts to populate space stations and things like that. And that would be what, like 2159 in AD reckoning, if you're still going by that. So that's about how far in the future this stuff is supposed to take place. Going back to my involvement with Gundam, I as well, just like you, just like most everyone in North America, saw Gundam Wing as their first Gundam anime, or their introduction to Gundam at all, really, because that was the first Gundam show that was really brought to cable television. It was on the Toonami block on Cartoon Network, where they showed off a lot of great animes to American audiences for the first time. Outlaw Star, Cowboy Bebop was on Toonami before it was anywhere else.
Yeah, so, I had already seen Cowboy Bebop though, because I was like keyed in. Like, so the thing about Toonami
you didn't
is
have to watch Gundam though, apparently.
I didn't say I watched it on Toonami.
What a normie.
I was definitely not a normie in terms of anime. But anyway, I like, because Cowboy Bebop came out in 99 and it was Toonami came out in the 2000s. So I had already seen it by the time it was coming out on Toonami.
I thought Toonami was like late. I thought Toonami was like 99.
It was like when did I think Cowboy Bebop came out on Toonami, like maybe 2003, 2004.
So Toonami debuted in 1997. Let's see, Cowboy Bebop Toonami release. I'm curious now. Not to
Cowboy Bebop was 98. Excuse me.
Cowboy Bebop initially aired on September 2nd, 2001 on Cartoon Network. So it is true. It had been out for a little while. But, like I said, for most American audiences, that was the first time they saw it, because that was the first time it was really on television.
Sure.
But anyway, Gundam Wing, that's why everyone has seen Gundam Wing, because it was on Toonami. It's funny that when you watch more Gundam, you realize that Wing is probably one of the weaker entries in the series overall, but it did have some of the coolest mech design by far. So that's why it still holds like a special place in people's heart and all that. Like the Tall Geese is such an awesome mobile suit. But I digress. It's also an alternate timeline. That's the thing. Is in Gundam there's the Universal Century timeline, which is where the original series, the one that aired in 1979 in Japan, takes place, and a bunch of other series throughout time, up to I think the most recent one before this, I think was Gundam Unicorn. Although I think there might have been one more between Unicorn and now. But anyway, I digress. This series, Requiem for Vengeance, takes place in the main Gundam timeline, and it takes place towards the end of what's called the 1 Year War, which was the first major war between the space noids, the humans that live in space, and the Earth Federation, the people that still live on Earth. The issue is that the Earth Federation had exerted too much control, too much oppression over the spacefaring humans as they'd seen it, and so this was sort of a response to that.
It was a war of independence, right? And they
More or less,
attacked
yeah,
Earth, basically.
yeah,
And
a
that's
war of
not
independence, but also an invasion too.
Yes, yes. They invaded Earth, right? Earth is on the defense, but they are, and to set the stakes of this, right? Because it's implied in this series, Gundam Requiem of Vengeance, but it does require the viewer to kind of put it together. But the way I understood it, you can tell me if this is correct. So
Yeah,
basically, the mobile suits are technology that Zeon, which is the invading force, has, right? And that the Earth Federation does not have. And so
correct.
they're initially winning this war, and then all of a sudden, these more advanced mobile suits are developed by Earth, and that causes, the invading forces to start to lose and have to evacuate. And that includes like the regular kind of newer mobile suits, which are superior to the Zaku, which are the mobile suits that the Zeon, the invading forces, are using, and then the Gundam, which is like the super advanced version of that, that
Yeah.
is absolutely terrifying. That these new weapons like change the course of the war, basically.
Yeah, and it's not just the technology too, and I'll get into the technology in a second. Don't worry. Also, my Gundam involvement, just to backtrack and touch on that really quick, really kicked off when I lived in Korea, and I walked past the Gundam base model kit store every day on my way to the OGN studio, and I was like, I built one of those kits, one of the wing kits back in high school for fun. Like I didn't have any tools. I just like twisted it off the sprue, which will make any model maker cringe. But I was a kid, and so I'm like, I bet it'd be fun to build one of those model kits. So I just bought one. And then I was like, oh my gosh, this is plastic crack. Like I'm hooked. And so I started building dozens of these kits, and I was like, well, I should watch the shows, because I would just pick whatever kit looked cool, and then I watched the series. So I ended up watching all the original, all the UC stuff, a bunch of the alternate timeline stuff. So got really into Gundam that way. Anyway, back to the show. So yeah, the Zaku was the mobile suit, and they have the Zeon has a few different mobile suits. The Zaku is kind of the workhorse of the Zeon military, more or less, on the mobile suit side. But yeah, then the Earth Federation was losing because they didn't have it. They invented the Gundam. There was a prototype, and then the RX-78-2 is the ultra famous one piloted by Amuro Ray in the original series, and then this Gundam in this series is actually a new Gundam that we haven't seen before,
Mm.
which is apparently the RX-78EX, I guess, is the title. I'm trying to find the exact. I have it written down, the exact one. Anyway, it is a Gundam. The RX-78GE Gundam EX actually is the technical term for this one. So it's a Gundam we haven't seen before. It's a character we haven't met before, but it's the same type of thing where there is this, new mobile suit that is just on a level that has not been seen before. It's using beam weapons. It's extremely durable, and crucially, it's piloted by we find out a young man later, a boy essentially, but he is also what you would call a new type in the Gundam universe. So this is where we get away from science fiction into a little bit of fantasy here, but so part of the Gundam universe is that as humanity left the stars, the humans as a species were forced to begin evolving in different ways to handle living in space better. And one of the ways they did was what they call new types, which are people that are, like, I would say, lightly psychic, for lack of a better way to describe it.
Mildly clairvoyant, right?
You have extremely tuned senses of what's around you. You have light telepathy, so you can send, like, feelings, or you can sense danger coming. So our main character in the series on the Xeon side is
Solari,
also
yeah.
a new type.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's in UC 79 in that year. The existence of new types is kind of rumored, but people don't really, most people don't believe they exist. Others do. It's like a very debated thing, but clearly in the series that exists. But when you put a new type in something like a Gundam, you essentially create this, like, superhuman pairing of super person with a super mech, and then you have, like, an almost unstoppable force, which is what we get to, where, yeah, now you can put as many Zaku's in front of it as you want, basically, and it will just, like, tear through them. And so that's kind of the premise of this, is that this series takes place towards the end of that 1 year war, where Zeon has begun to lose because of the actions of the other newer mobile suits and the other Gundam out there. That's the famous Gundam that isn't in this series. But now here one shows up in the Eastern European theater and causes a bunch of problems for the Red Wolves, our Zeon thing. So it's interesting because this series is really from the perspective of the villains, quote unquote. In the Gundam series, the person leading Zeon during this era is a very bad person and really into fascism. But the initial reason for the rebellion is kind of legit, actually. They seem to have been very a bit oppressed and all that. So that's the interesting thing about the Gundam universe in general, is that Earth is defending itself, but it kind of brought this war upon itself in a to a certain extent too. So
Right.
while Xeon are the bad guys, they do have some legitimate grievances too. So there's some depth there right off the
And
bat, which is
this
good.
is a common sci-fi trope,
Yeah.
obviously, but the Expanse is something that plays with a lot of these ideas too. That is a newer, like, novel series slash form of media. And I didn't know this, but basically, I was telling you this before we started the show, Doa, but on my stream, because I stream to a bunch of boomers, basically. Um,
The
One of
best.
the funny things is, like, a bunch of people on my stream are hardcore Gundam fans, and I just didn't have any idea that this fandom really existed, because it's not something that I've ever been into. But there are actually, there's a lot of novels that people read that are set in this universe that really flesh it out, that are designed for adults. And there's kind of a constellation of not only TV series, but movies and limited series that come out and have been coming out for years now that I was unaware of, that are very much catered at an adult audience, probably because these people were kids when Mobile Suit Gundam was coming out, and the fandom has kind of, like, tracked them as they've aged. So
Well, I would kind of, as they say in corporate lingo, push back on that a bit. I hate corporate lingo, by the way. But anyway, I would argue with that a little bit, because the original Gundam series was really heavy at times. It did not come off as a series made for children. There have certainly been some Gundam series geared toward kids, absolutely. But Gundam is rooted in pretty realistic war drama, right from the beginning.
hmm.
So the tone of this show, I would say, very much fits in with the tone of the original Gundam series from the early 70s, and then the other Universal Century stuff. In general, the Universal Century stuff tends to be more heavy real war drama type content. And then you get stuff like Gundam Wing, where it's a boy band with robots, and there's, like, some, like, I'll kill you stuff, but, like, it's there's, like, yeah, I think when you get away from the Universal Century timeline, it gets a little bit wacky sometimes, but the UC stuff is usually pretty solid. But I have to say one more cool thing about this universe before we really get into the
All right.
show, is that do you remember in the show they mentioned Minovsky particles?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what those are? Because
No.
they didn't really explain it. They didn't really need to explain it for the purpose of this show, I suppose. But you might ask yourself, well, this is so far in the future. We're talking again, like, this in AD reckoning, like 2159 is when this would take place. Why isn't everyone just shooting each other from 100 miles away with guided missiles and all that kind of stuff? Why is there all this close combat and everything? And there is actually an in-universe reason for that. And the reason is because out in space, when the mobile suits, and even before the mobile suits, some technology was being developed, they discovered that a brand new compact fusion reactor that they invented that uses helium-3 from Jupiter, creates the side effect of this particle that seemed to be outside of physics. And as they studied it, they realized this particle blocks, it essentially creates a large field of electromagnetic interference. So things like, so all the, sensing technology and all that kind of stuff, the guidance systems, all that stuff doesn't work when when reactors like this are around. So basically, that forced combat from being extremely long distance to being extremely small distance again, because these reactors cover a very large space. And when a reactor like that is run in an area, that area doesn't return to normal electromagnetic stuff for about a month. So it has a long, long effect. If people are constantly doing it, you've effectively taken out long range warfare. So that's why that was one of the main reasons for the creation of mobile suits, is you needed to create an agile military technology that could fight in close combat, So in space, you aren't as hindered by things like, gravity and all that kind of stuff. So you can develop these things. And again, combine that with these people with extreme extrasensory perceptions being born, and you get a really good in-universe reason for having mobile suits, and a good reason why people are swinging axes or swords or only fighting within visual range, because you really only can fight within visual range.
Right.
So it's kind of
And
it's a
these
neat part of the
ideas, like,
universe. I like
yeah,
that.
that's super.
Yeah.
First off, that's really cool. Like, I love
Yeah.
that they address the reason for that, because it enables, obviously, the imaginative side of the technology and the exciting
It's
side of the
really brilliant.
technology.
Yeah.
So it's pretty fun. But also, I mean, you see that in later mecha animes too, like Evangelion with the AT fields and everything like that. These things require
Where do you think they got that
reasons.
from?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The thing is, a lot of science fiction owes a lot of its concepts to Gundam. When you look at a lot of the stuff that's come out in the last 30 years, and then you go watch the original Gundam series, you're like, oh, they were already doing this thing before The Expanse did it, before all these other things did it. So it really was like a transformative work of science fiction on a global scale. So it is very exciting to see stuff like this still come out. There's a card game coming that I'm very excited about, because I'm a card game nerd too. But yeah, so that basically sets the premise for the series. It takes the interesting perspective of the villains, and I think it takes the even more interesting perspective of the villains fighting in a losing conflict. Like, they know that the war is ending, but not in a winning side for them. So this kind of takes place during essentially the retreat, which is, and then so this whole thing introduces, in my opinion, the coolest thing about this series is that it sort of flips the Gundam, as a hero thing on its head, and it says, let's make Gundam, but the Gundam is Godzilla. It's this unstoppable force that is chasing you, and you have to try to be creative and cobble together these ways to try to either just slow it down or get away from it, maybe beat it if you're lucky. But it's essentially Gundam as Godzilla, which I think is really, really cool.
What the hell?
Yeah, and I think you even see that in the way that the Gundam is even introduced at first too, because it arises from seemingly nowhere, and you do get the kaiju vibes, especially the way even the cinematography and the way they shoot the show works. Because I think one of my favorite shots is very reminiscent of a Godzilla movie, which is that when Solari gets her Zaku destroyed at first, and there's the slash, and she's on the ground after her mech has been destroyed, and she's looking up at the Gundam through the slash, and it's the glowing eyes. And they make the Gundam repeatedly feel as though it's alive, like it is a kaiju within this. And it's inscrutable and menacing, but alive. Like there's something in there that you can't possibly know what's going on through the pilot's mind, right? And so I think that's what's so terrifying about it, is that you get a sense that it's not just some inanimate object, that there is some level of thoughts and deliberate action behind the Gundam, but you just don't know who it is for most of this series.
Yeah, it's a Gundam horror show as a kaiju show. It's really interesting. There's never been a Gundam show like this before, and I think it's such a neat twist on the concept. And just the way they shot it, I agree. Where a lot of it is shot from the human perspective, because a lot of the characters aren't in mobile suits for most of it. So it's just these human characters with these mobile suits fighting right next to them, and stuff's falling and all that. It's all very kaiju movie-esque. And I think that's really really neat. And then you've got that war drama on top of it. But man, just getting into the plot with the show. So we join essentially the European front, the Eastern European front in what's Romania, right?
Yeah, Cluj-Napoca. It's an attack
Yeah.
on Cluj-Napoca in Romania.
Right. So they're kind of trying to hold ground, but everybody's kind of like, yeah, we're losing this war, and it very quickly turns into a retreat. Because the base they take is booby trapped, and most of the armory is destroyed. They would have all been destroyed if not for the arrival of the Red Wolves, which is a squad of Zaku, helmed by our main character, and they come and seem to be saving the day. It's like it's a almost heroic kind of thing, and then the Gundam shows up, and the one of my favorite scenes, probably my favorite scene in the whole show, that annoying pilot with mutton chops is like he's like oh cute, the Feddies, the Federation got themselves a little mobile, and he gets cut off because a beam goes right through the middle of his mobile suit out of nowhere, through him, through the building behind him, and then explodes in a huge thing on the mountain behind him, and then his suit explodes. And then you just see the Gundam standing there in the with the flames below it and its red eyes, just holding the beam rifle out there, and everyone's like, holy shit, what just happened? And I'm like, that is how you introduce your monster. Like, that was such an incredible scene. And that was the moment where I was like, okay, I'm in with the show 100%.
Enemy sighted, 12 o'clock.
How cute! Betty's finally got themselves a mobile.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting, like you say, is that it starts with an attack, and it just everything quickly turns south, and the rest of the show past that moment is like, okay, we were the invading force, and now we're on the retreat, and we are trying to survive. The military units are being destroyed. We're trying to escape back into space, and effectively, the rest of the show is just them attempting to live and like slow the Gundam down so that they can basically cover the distance between Cluj-Napoca and Odessa, which is a city in Ukraine, right? Obviously, very famous because of the Ukrainian war right now and everything that's been happening around there, unfortunately. But basically, it's this like convoy that's going from Cluj-Napoca across Romania and what is Moldova into Ukraine in order to get to the escape ships and leave Earth. So it's really cool because what I enjoyed about this is, I'm not even a Gundam fan. Like I said, I know nothing, but I found this show very compelling and fascinating because they do a good job of basically, you understand that there's a wider war going on and you can sort of get some of the details. Obviously, if you want to look into it deeper, you absolutely can do that, but it's not necessary to appreciate this because at its core, this is a vignette. It's about, the struggles of war from a few individual perspectives. And you don't need to know really the broader aims to emotionally resonate with the characters, or understand, kind of the troubles that they're going through, because the story is not, it's not a geopolitical space opera to the degree that The Expanse becomes in this show. Right. I understand that it is broadly in terms of Gundam, but it would be like The Expanse if you just took one of the characters' storylines and then told a short story from their life. You don't have to know all of the machinations that are going on or the reasons behind things, because this, especially by the end, it's very clear that this is about the cost of war on individuals, right? And that is a story that doesn't require broader context as to why the war is happening.
Yeah, and it does such a great job of that too by introducing a lot of characters that become pretty memorable, I would say, where throughout this show it is just and I say show, but it's really a film. I think we should talk about it more as a film than a show, really. But throughout this, as they kind of make this retreat, go from place to place. We're introducing these characters. You know, the big part, I think the big main one is they go to this junkyard essentially, that is this space controlled by Xeon, and but you know the person the officer who runs it is just despondent, and he's like he's in charge of a junkyard. You know, he just all he wants is people to stay away so he can just live out the war. You know, but he's you know you can tell he's very just like depressed with everything, you know, feels useless and all that. And then you've got the captain who's kind of in charge of the, you know, mechanics there that is all excited that his old friend comes and needs help, and they rebuild some Zaku's for them and all that. And so he's very invigorated, and the other guy's trying to shut it down. But, you know, you've got the one who's just excited about, you know, having a chance to do something. And then the other guy that's so jaded about everything that he, even when the chance comes, he doesn't want to do it. He just wants people to stay away. And you know, and then you know the Gundam does show up at the base and destroy everything. And so then you've got the question of, you know, did our main characters really invite all this death and destruction to this place? Would they have escaped that otherwise? So there's, you know, that, you know, aspect of should they feel this guilt from, you know, insisting that they rebuild these Zaku's for them to pilot, or would it have happened anyway? You know, that military, I forget his name, but the military guy that runs the base, he kind of has his
Major
heroic
Ronet.
moment.
Yeah.
Major Rona, yeah, he has his moment where he's sort of like, you know, he's sort of like you know, jumps into action when he's really needed. And so initially you just loathe this guy because he seems to just be a speed bump for everything the main characters want to do. But then in the end, you know, you kind of understand him better and all that. And so I like it. I feel like they did add like a good amount of little depth to all the side characters that came along too.
Well, I
I
think
was
what
expecting.
it does, and you sympathize with the major because he is
Mhm.
trying to do what he can to take care of his people. So it's when, you know, when they show up and they're basically on the retreat, but everybody's on the retreat. I mean, everything is a panic right now, especially for the forces of Xeon, because it's a bunch of small little convoys or individual groups that have kind of escaped the destruction of the military unit and are trying to like find their way back or find a safe haven. And like they can't, his job is to maintain the base and to maintain, you know, his own people. And if there is
Yeah.
a real danger in situations like this that you won't be able to feed people or take care of them or hide effectively if there's too many of them, which is why he says like leave the wounded, but you're okay, like you need to keep moving. And right, you know, should the resources be deployed to creating, you know, cobbling together some Zaku? Is that the best thing that they could be doing at that time being? Like these are the hard decisions that you have to make as a commander, and I think he is sympathetic in that degree. You
Yeah.
know, so I didn't take him as altogether negative. I just think he had a different perception of what his duty was, and we also just don't have all the information that he has making his decisions. Right? It's not told. You know, we don't get a sense of what because Alfie, right, the mechanic captain said that their job is to maintain the supply lines as best they can by recycling stuff. And so is the work on the Zaku meaning that other units are not getting supplies, right, that they need or repairs that they need? So there's a lot of questions here, but you know, you're never supposed to, as the viewer, you are never supposed to have all the information, which I think is an effective narrative tool because nobody has all the information. The situation is just completely out of control, right?
Yeah.
It is, you know, it is the chaos of war, and it is like there are individual sacrifices being, you know, that have to be made. And I think the other theme that goes along with this too is as the Gundam comes and as they're hunting these people down, and as we approach the end of the series and the conflict between Iria Solari, the captain that we've been following, and the unnamed Gundam pilot, right? Which is that, is it ethical or is it a war crime, even if the forces of Xeon have been the attackers and may attack again in the future if they are not killed? Like that's a very legitimate concern, I believe. For
Spoiler alert, they do.
right.
Yeah.
Is it ethical to be hunting these people down that are clearly trying to escape with their lives, right? And that becomes, you know, you can understand the fear of these people, and these people are doing their jobs with the military and following orders, but do they deserve to be killed when they are no longer trying to fight this war effectively?
Yeah, that's the thing. Yep. And this I feel like the junkyard part too gets into like real kaiju territory as well, when it's like we have to cobble together this technological way to maybe fight the monster, and it's a long shot because they're like, well, we could rebuild these Zaku's and kind of put some extra armor on 'em, and like maybe that would work. And of course, it doesn't work that well, but it works well enough to just get them to the next step, and all that. And then you've got the Gundam Godzilla, chasing them the whole time. This usually the Gundams have some like brightly colored aspects to them and all that. Famously, the main RX-78-2 has these big bright areas of red and blue and white and all that. And this Gundam is just gray. It's just very muted too, and so that adds an extra layer of menace. That there's where it kind of takes some of the personality out of it to where this is just a killing machine and it's coming for you. And so I like that aspect of it too, is that it's definitely the least colorful Gundam we've had in a series too.
Except for the eyes, right? And that's why you're like drawn
Right.
to the red eyes.
Right, but there's no paint job on it really at
Right.
all, which is very not like any of the other, Gundams and things like that. Which leads us to, the junkyard is destroyed. They get away with a couple cobbled together Zaku's and like a small group of survivors. But and it's essentially just Solari and her lieutenant, I guess it is.
Well,
The
Lieutenant,
only
she
other,
picks up, basically these were all people from different units who have banded together.
no, there was
You mean
one guy.
LaShawn. You mean LaShawn.
Yeah, LaShawn, yeah, that's right.
The
I
other
know I'm
pilot
blanking
from
on
the,
name.
the Red Wolves are the squad of 4. 2 of them are dead. 2 of them are alive.
The only other surviving Red Wolf, yeah, and he's kind of obsessed with vengeance a little bit. Shall we say that this show is a requiem for
Well, but
vengeance?
that's the whole point. Is like the
Yeah,
Requiem for
exactly.
Vengeance is saying like the vengeance doesn't lead anywhere, right? Besides
Yeah.
bloodlust, and it causes unnecessary death. So
It's a funeral dirge for vengeance because of the grim places it leads us, right? But he's the only other pilot, so But then they come up with this sort of like side mission because the Gundam shows up with like another mobile suit called a GM. That's another new Earth Federation mobile suit, but it's more of like a mass produced mobile suit. So it's still a little bit better than the Zaku's, it seems like, but it's not quite as powerful as the Gundam. And so they come up with this idea of, why don't we steal one of those, and then that'll help us escape. We can fight the Gundam better with it because it's better than the Zaku. And if we get it back to Zeon, they can take it apart and study it, and maybe we can develop technology that we can then use to, make a comeback in this war now. Because the Gundams have shown up, and those are just going to crush us, So I like that there's these little side stories within there, again, which feels very kaiju, where it's like, this plan didn't work, let's try this plan, and we're just going to try a little bit of everything and eventually do it. And so, then that leads, I would say, to like the main kind of final set piece of this, where they're sneaking onto this Federation base to try to steal a GM, and everything goes to hell, obviously, and they don't end up succeeding, and then through this, it's discovered that the pilot of the Gundam is a child, essentially, like a middle school age boy, it looks like, maybe early teens or something, but he's also clearly a new type. And this hits our main character very hard because her whole motivation to get home is to get home to her son, who seems to be about the same age from what we can gather from flashbacks. So now it's like this Gundam was this faceless monster, but now it's like she's seeing her son inside it, because she feels, the horror of children being forced to participate in this war she's seen so much horror in. So I think they add that great little element of depth to the conclusion of this, to the grand finale, right? Where now it does what a good war movie does, which is make you feel not good about war, where no matter how this ends, it's just bad. War is not good, right? And like we have so much stuff out there that like glorifies it or whatever, but at the end of the day, it's pretty crappy, right? The effect it has on people, whether you survive or not. If you don't survive, you're dead, right? But if you do survive, you still carry a lot of that with you.
Right.
I have friends that were greatly affected by their time fighting in real wars, right? So I think this show does a good job of introducing elements like the one we just talked about that make sure that you don't come away from this show with a good feeling, which I don't think.
Yeah, and it also just shows the arbitrary nature of war as well. And I think it does really give you perspective into both sides of the conflict, and how you're trained to dehumanize the other side to a large degree, and we see that from the side of the Earth forces and from the side of the Zeon. Because remember, at the start of this, there's the attack on Cluj-Napoca. The Zeon forces start losing. They call in the Red Wolves, and the Red Wolves seem pretty amped to just murder a bunch of people, and happy-go-lucky. And it's like we're the best, and like we're the thing that turns the tide. And then the Gundam shows up and just randomly kills a couple of them, and then of course they're devastated. Solari's devastated by the loss of the other two members under her command. And then by the end of this, in the final battle in which she and her scrapped together Zaku is fighting the Gundam in Odessa in Ukraine, and she's losing, obviously, because she, as good of a pilot as she is, she can't overcome the technological gap between her suit and the Gundam. And then you get to hear, she starts talking to the kid who she ran into on the military base in the other Gundam and saying like, hey, I'm a mother. And that starts to affect him. And like, why are we fighting? And he starts, basically spewing a bunch of rhetoric back at her about the Zeon forces being invaders. And if he lets them live, then they become terrorists later on, right?
We're just trying to retreat. Please, let us go!
Just surrender! If we let you terrorists off the planet, you'll just attack us again later!
What he's undoubtedly been told by whoever put him in
and it's
that
not
suit,
wrong,
right?
It's not wrong, like but it's one thing to have these ideas abstractly, and it's another thing to be the individual who is doing the actions which are killing people on a human level, right? And I think that they start to have that connection. But in the same way that her squad mates were arbitrarily murdered by this kid, he then, when she's talking to him, is then arbitrarily murdered by a different Zaku who manages to sneak in there and just kill him.
You're right. We could maybe
No, stop it!
Right?
Yeah.
And so you get it where it's like the moment, at the exact moment you feel like there is going to be some sort of reconciliation or human connection between the sides, it just abruptly ends. And we're back to, merciless, bloody war again. It's a great moment because I was really afraid, DoA, at that point in time that they were just going to cop out and have some sort of like get out of the mechs and hug moment. And then he just dies. And I'm like, yes, that's how you end this.
That was very Gundam of them to do that. That again, that fits in tone with, what we see in a lot of Gundam series. But yeah, what a great moment. Like, it is about to that point where you're like, oh, is he going to stop fighting? Has she gotten through him? Are they going to, join forces? Is he going to let all the Zeon soldiers escape? Because the final fight of the show happens while the Zeon forces are loading onto these big ships that are blasting off from the spaceport in Odessa and going back to orbit to join up with the bigger ships and flee Earth, right? So they are actively running away, and he and the other Alliance forces or Federation forces are just trying to kill as many as possible, So it all thing feels gross. And then, the Midnighters, who are this other group of mobile suit users, and they're piloting the mobile suits that are, no joke, they're called goofs, or some people say goufs, but it's really, you see them pronounce goofs. They even say it in the show in Requiem for Vengeance once, which is kind of like an upgraded Zaku. It's like a little bit better version of the Zaku. They've got horns and stuff, but one of them, this kid's about to be like, oh, I guess, and then this giant sword just comes through the Gundam from behind, and you're just like, oh my gosh, now he's dead, right? And the Midnighter guy is like, all right, you're welcome, let's go. And she's like, no. But how tragic, right? Because she's just trying to get back to her son. She holds the line so everyone else can escape, and she stays back and talk to this kid to try to talk sense into him because she sees him as her son. And so in the end, not only does this projection of her son in this enemy mobile suit die in front of her because she distracted it, but she won't get home to see her son maybe ever again at this point. So it's just this
Well, by
very
her
tragic
choice,
end.
and I think at the end,
Exactly,
you know,
but that still is tragic.
we
you know,
we
that
we
still is
went
tragic.
we went from this moment of strength into, and then you know we lost the war in Europe and Asia. So then I went to Africa to fight for
Yeah.
all children do not have to fight. I'm like, but
Yeah.
aren't you by continuing to fight ensuring that more children fight to stop you from
No.
fighting?
How could I leave, knowing that more will suffer this fate? I joined the Zeon Remnant in Africa, where the battles against the Federation still raged.
That's where I would say just press stop and exit the screen right after that happens, because this show does everything really, really well. It's like in terms of like an Olympics gymnastics performance, it's like the best one you've ever seen. And then in the very last jump where they're about to like do something easy and take a bow, they trip and fall over. And that is the end of the show. The last like 3 minutes where it's like, I will go to fight with. I'm like, wait, why are you doing this? You're just kind of continuing the same stuff you just said you didn't want to continue and was pointless. I don't understand.
I don't
ending
understand
of
that
the
at
show
all.
at all. I don't. I even went back. I went back and watched it again because I was like, did I like mishear something or misread something? I was watching it subbed, Japanese with the subtitles. And I was like, did I just miss something? But I watch it in English. I watch it with the subtitles again. And I was like, no, they just tacked on this really generic, like, I will always fight for the children moment at the end that doesn't make
Which
any
also
sense of
requires
show.
the children to fight, and therefore you are killing the children just like you did before. So I don't.
I know. You're killing the children's parents. They're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs. It's it's just such a dumb, nonsensical, needless final little thing tacked onto it that I was just like, why? And you can tell both of us really liked this show, but that last 3 minutes just is so stupid. So that's just so turn it off. Just right when that scene starts and she was like, and then the Xeon forces left, and you're like, stop. Just hit stop right there, and then pretend that's the end. Don't watch the last like 3 minutes, and then you'll love.
I'm just disappointed they didn't kill her.
Me too.
Because basically you get the sense that that's going to happen because she basically goes on a suicide mission to stop, this from happening. And to have the Gundam, the Gundam arbitrarily die and then have her arbitrarily die would be the best end of this show. Because as far as I know, she's not a character that appears in anything else. So
no, this is independent of any of the other. This is a side story within the main timeline, basically. It doesn't connect to anything else in any of the other series. So yeah, you could have just had her kill, or they could have just had her, make it home somehow. Like, oh, I managed to find another remnant and make it home a month later or something, and and then have her like get home to her son, but still carry this, this damage with her essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't even mind a sequel series, which is like the Behind Enemy Lines series, where she's trying to find other people to escape. Like, I don't think this has to end with her. I think she's a really cool character, actually. And we could have done something more with this, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, you don't know if this is getting renewed, but anyway,
Very
overall, though,
throwaway
I found this to be pretty compelling. And I think we should talk about some of the aspects that maybe are not so compelling about this show.
We have to.
Because even me,
man,
as a non-Gundam fan, like, I didn't think this was amazing or anything, but I did find it pretty good. I thought it was a good use of 2 hours of my time, right? It's
Totally.
not a huge investment. And I think the return on the time investment is worth watching this show. But we also have to discuss how this is not the first CG Gundam, but it is actually the first TV show made in Unreal Engine 5. And Unreal Engine 5 is very popular. Many games are actually switching to Unreal Engine 5, or developers are switching off using their own engines because it's such a great system for video games. But you will be warned that the visual experience is very uneven watching this show.
Yeah.
Some of it is really good. I think it's actually incredibly effective for the mecha scenes, right? It looks, I think, quite good, both in terms of visual, like the appearance and the animations when they're actually doing the battles. I think it's really, really good. The problem is when we get to the human scenes, of which there are many in this show.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like it looks like it looks like an in-engine cutscene from a modern AAA game, basically. And when I say that, I mean that it looks pretty good.
Yeah.
But but when people are talking, it's like their hands are moving like this. There's like no
The worst
motion
one
of the
the
fingers
worst
or
one is
anything.
when they're
Like,
when they're
oh,
in
why
when they're
they
in
look like
the
marionettes. Yeah.
yeah, it's the animations, but I think the worst visual sequences are when they're drinking that whiskey because the glasses look like so fucking fake when they're in the major's
Yeah.
office. Just sipping on the whiskey, like it looks so janky. The animations as well as the glasses that they're holding. I mean,
Kentucky bourbon from Kentucky.
so I can get over that because I'm a gamer who's used to seeing in-engine cutscenes, and I actually really like story-based games. So I am not off-put by it. Doesn't make the story less impactful to me to see that, but I could understand for many people why it would. And I think one thing that we can say about this show is that inarguably this would be better as either a traditional animated show or a live action show. This was probably
Love
the
to see this in
worst.
live action.
Yeah,
Oh.
this was probably the worst choice they could have made for making this show, but I would also imagine it was the cheapest.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say, but like Unreal Engine 5, at least in this use, is not ready for this type of application. It does not look good enough. Like the landscapes look great, the Gundams look great, vehicle stuff looks great. The movement of everything besides the Gundams looks janky. The people look like marionettes. The faces are generally pretty frozen looking. They put a lot of effort into the main character, but that
She
just
was
makes
motion captured as well.
and that just makes it even weirder when it's so clear that like she just looks better in every way and
Yes.
moves better in every way than all the other characters in the show. So yeah, it's just not. It's nice try. It was cool that you tried this, but it didn't work out, I would say. It doesn't. I agree that it's worse than traditional animation, and it's also worse than live action would have been. But I think they wanted to try something new and novel, and I give them points for that. But yeah, it did not work for me at all. Through the entire thing, it stood out as kind of awkward to me, and it did take away from it a little bit. Luckily, the story was so good, and the Gundam scenes were so good that like overall, I really enjoyed it, and I think you're on the same page with that. But yeah, the animation was not great.
Yeah, and the other thing that's not great is even though this was designed to be an English language first show, obviously with the intent of also dubbing it in Japanese for the Japanese audience that would consume this content, and indeed they did get many accomplished Japanese voice actors. I would say the English dub is not good, and both of us watched it in Japanese with English subtitles as a result, which was fine, by the way. The Japanese voice acting is fine.
Yeah, I tried watching it in English first, and it's just not. Yeah, it's just not good. I don't know why. I mean, I don't have any particular comments on those voice actors. I'm not familiar with all of their work, but the biggest thing with this series is that it feels like everybody recorded and I'm sure this is what happened. It feels like everybody recorded their lines at different times in different places, and so there was no sort of continuity in terms of a conversation being had. You just had the lines, you had the direction from the director, and then they just pushed that stuff together. And that can work, but it creates this sort of feeling that we feel in the show from the English voice acting where you can really tell that these people are not actually talking to each other. They're just reading lines that are then edited together. So the tone,
the dialogue
changes
feels
between characters.
stilted.
Very stilted. Yeah, it was bad enough that after one episode of the English, I just changed it to the Japanese with subtitles because that's how I'm used to watching Gundam shows anyway.
Sure,
And
yeah.
then it was fine. Then I got to just kind of discard that concern and go through it. But yeah, it's too bad. And it's weird for an English language first Gundam series. It really kind of fumbled the English language part. So yeah, I mean, nice try, but yeah, it just doesn't work. I would recommend watching it with subtitles instead. Japanese.
Yeah, and the
audio
experience in
subtitles.
Japanese was not off-putting at all if you're used to watching anime. So,
And it makes it feel more like a Godzilla movie almost too. So it works that way too.
So I think those are some of the primary problems. To touch on some of the other strengths, I thought the music was generally very good. I thought the opening credit, like classical piece, was really well done. I think, at least with me, that makes a big difference in anime, because I want the anime intro song to be good enough that I watch it every time. I don't want to press skip on that. Like, that's part of, for me, has always been part of the anime experience. In part of the TV experience in general. Obviously, this extends to things like Star Trek, or, with very iconic, opening credit sequences.
Gets you in the mood. If
Yeah,
it's
it gets
done
you in the mood, right? It preps you. And I think that the opening sequence to this is really good. And I really enjoyed the more classical style music that they chose for this, which obviously ties into the characters, because Solari's husband, who we understand later on has died, was a musician. She herself is a violinist as well. So you do get the through line and the synergy between the soundtrack and the characters. But I thought the sound design was really good. It doesn't sound cheap. The effects, everything like that, the music, all of that was quite well done.
Can we talk a bit about the addition of the music subplot kind of in there, where she was supposedly this
Sure.
professional violinist that was then kind of pulled into war and all that, because that touches on an important thing that a lot of people, everyone has lives outside of the war that they're participating in too, and so that kind of culminates in this sort of like nightmare sequence where she's playing violin on stage again, and then her beautiful red dress turns into this river of blood that flows
Which,
out
by
into
the way, would have
audience,
looked
and
amazing either in live action or in animation. It ends up looking janky, but the idea is really good.
yeah, it's a great sequence because there's these people clapping in the audience, and then the light comes up, and they're all the people that have died, in her opinion, because of her, and then this river of blood flows out from her, and it's all very symbolic and really well done, and hinges on that musical background that she has. But the music was done by Wilbert Roget. Sorry if I'm messing up your name, man. William Roget II. But he did a lot of the Call of Duty games. He did a lot of the Star Wars shows and Star Wars video games. He did Mortal Kombat 11, Mortal Kombat 1. So he has like a pretty strong pedigree when it comes to like good orchestrated scores for gaming stuff. And I think he did a great job with this too. Yeah, the music definitely for me stood out as a major positive for this as well.
Yeah, that sequence, though, is just, I think that you brought it up. That's like a perfect example of a great idea in this show that is really hampered by the tools that they're using, because doing that in Unreal Engine 5, unfortunately, just really limits, I think, the impact of what could be a very powerful visual scene.
Yeah, it
like
is too bad.
the concept is good. It's just the execution is not. It leaves you wanting more. Like, the only thing I thought of was like, damn, how cool would this be if it was live action, or damn, how cool would this be if it was animated? But instead what we get is me thinking about how cool it would have been not looking like this, instead of me really being affected by it or enjoying it. So that was disappointing, I think. There were also certain, as much as I like the visual design in this show, there were also certain elements that just screamed Japan in like not a good way. So, for example, I think the most egregious example is the general who shows up, who has like the open shirt,
like,
who doesn't look like a military figure at all, by the way.
Were you in a Final Fantasy game and got lost?
He looks like a Final Fantasy game, or like one of the mafia characters
about
from
that
the
guy.
Like a Dragon / Yakuza series. And he has like the Wolverine hair. He looks terrible in this.
It's
Terrible.
ridiculous.
What the hell are we doing here?
Major General Kellan. Welcome, sir.
Just fought off an EFF attack and now you're all fighting again?
It's like it's like this is what happens when your custom character or custom costume character appears in a cutscene of a game, and you've chosen like a custom costume that doesn't match the game's tone at all. Like he's like his shirt's unbuttoned and all. He's like, hey guys, I'm super crazy cool Final Fantasy general guy. What's up? And it's like, where did you come from? You don't belong in this series. What?
Well, it's also that the series presents
War
itself.
drama.
There are some things that I found jarring about the aesthetic. So basically, this is a show about the military, right? And the military has to have order and it has to have conformity in order to function. That is true of every military ever on the face of Earth in humanity, right? If you don't have that conformity, if you have too much individualism, militaries are inherently fascist structures. That's just what they are, right? And we don't like fascism because it's military applied to civilians. We don't like that, right? And it's not good, but you have to have that kind of rigid order, conformity, unified aesthetic, unquestioning duty, and obedience, right? And so when we get into certain elements, such as the lieutenant with the pink hair and nose ring and tattoos that they pick up, it's like, what military on Earth would allow somebody to have the pink hair and the nose ring? Like, you cannot. First off, it's just a hazard. It's just objectively a hazard. Imagine trying to be camouflaged and there's somebody with pink hair next to you. And also, like, what if your nose ring gets caught on something? You're literally just like in constant conflict, in physical danger. No, we don't have septum piercings. Come on. And then we get this general who is like the like a dragon character, or he looks like a Tekken character. I don't know. Pick what you want. Yeah. he looks like anything a Tekken character in an alternate costume. And clearly that's not a military uniform, but it is very jarring to have him next to the major character who is the buttoned up, military guy. And then this guy just rocks him. He's like, whatever, Major, you're not, chill out, dude. And then let's go drink, Solari. Can I use your office? It's just very weird.
I think part of that, and I agree that it goes to too extreme of a level for the rest of the tone of the show. I tend to think this is supposed to be part of what symbolizes the way that military structure and conformity falls apart towards the end of a conflict for the losing side, especially where people just don't care anymore. So they're just like, well, I'm just going to do whatever I want. Who's going to stop me?
Sure.
So
it could be represented way better than whatever this was.
Like I said, I think it's in there to symbolize that kind of thing, but I think it goes way too far to like ridiculous like clown shoes level, But it is hilarious, and that general guy is, I can't wait till he does show up in like as a DLC character in Tekken or something. And he hits people with a whiskey bottle and unbuttons his shirt more. Yeah, I was like, who is this guy?
So,
yeah. Also, the other thing that made me laugh a little bit is when the pink-haired character was talking about going undercover on the Federation base. I'm like, I think the giant tattoo of like the Zaku head on your bicep might cause a little bit of a problem with that. They cover it up, but still, I'm like, you're
this is not the person you want on an undercover operation.
No, yeah. That is a great moment though when she drops the watch. The main character Solari drops her watch that was given to her, I think, by her husband or something like that. It's got the Xeon logo on it, and the kid picks it up because they bump into each other, when she's undercover, and he's like, she's like, oh, it's mine, and he's like, very interesting souvenir you have there, and it's like,
but it's believable because people take stuff in war, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it's still like a hold your breath kind of moment too, which is
good.
Cool,
yeah, it was a good moment.
Cool little include. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did you drop this?
Yes, I did.
Quite the souvenir.
Yes, it is.
But I don't know. I hope that general guy got away. I hope wherever he is, he's living his best life, because he seems completely unaffected by the horrors of war. So more power to him. I'm sure he's out there just partying at a rave somewhere, being like, "Oh, I was on Earth for a while. Yeah, it got pretty hairy, but I got out." And those big like robots were fighting. It was pretty cool.
I had to deal with some uptight majors. Whatever.
Dude ran a junkyard. He was such a downer. But, yeah, he was great. And then the other, it's not a phase, mom, this is who I am now character, and yeah. But yeah, so there was a little bit of that. But aside from a couple little things that we just went through, I would absolutely recommend this series to anyone, Gundam fan or otherwise. I was very curious about what your opinion was going to be coming into this, because I knew, you were kind of the opposite of me, where I had seen a lot of Gundam stuff and you had seen essentially zero. And so I was really interested in hearing if the experience worked out without the backstory. And I figured there was enough in there, but it was really good to hear that you feel like you kind of understood what was going on without knowing without needing to know all the backstory.
No, I think they did a good job of giving you the requisite context, and if you wanted more context, it's easy to go look that up, right?
Yeah.
But I didn't feel like I was missing anything as somebody who is joining in the middle of this conflict. And I think the reveal too that they do in the show is very smart because it feels very natural, especially when it comes to Solari and her character, where you don't really know anything about her, and then they reveal that her husband was killed and they reveal that she has this child. But it comes at points where they do it naturally in that it's Alfie, this character who knew her before, explaining it to other people about to justify some of her behavior and things like that. So it's not. You don't feel that you've been artificially given too much information. You just feel like you've been dropped into this scenario that is comprehensible, and then the drip feed of information that they give you about the context of the conflict and the context of the character is like really well done.
Yeah. So then when the other concept of like a kid being forced to pilot this war machine because they're and being forced into this way too early, like anyone should be forced into it, but like at a very young age it's extra rough, right? It's extra something you don't want, but they're going to be the best pilot for this thing, so that's what we're going to do. War makes us do this kind of stuff, and that's also a theme with Gundam too. There's an entire series that's alternate timeline one called Iron-Blooded Orphans, which is this essentially this squad of child soldiers on Mars that manages to break free from their like oppressive military leaders and becomes a mercenary outfit in space. And one of them is a Gundam pilot who's also a child who's too young. So this is child pilots is like a theme, an ongoing theme in Gundam. And so introducing that common Gundam theme in this way, where we know right from the beginning it'll have this extra effect on our main character because of her son, and missing him is a really smart way to use that existing theme in Gundam in the universe in this show.
Nice. Yeah, I will say one other like minor quibble that I had, Doa, about the Japaneseification of this show and like the animeification was that kid, because when we're introduced to him, he's just playing his his like handheld console,
Nintendo Switch, obviously.
his Switch or his Steam or whatever he's playing, and they're like, oh, the kid's just playing a game while they're playing chess, and then he's like, queen to f7, it's like checkmate in 3, and they're like, oh my god, he's such a genius, he can play his I was just like cringe, like, why do we have to have this scene? That's not necessary to the storyline whatsoever, and is just that, I mean, they love doing this in like shonen manga or shonen anime shows where it's like, the kid is just so fucking smart, oh my god, and we don't need that. Like, we don't need that at all. He could have just been sitting there playing his video game and not done that, and it would have been way less cringe, way more believable, because it doesn't take away from the fact that the most important things is that he is a new type, like you say, and that he's a child soldier, right? That's the only things that matter about this kid. In fact, the less we know about him, the better.
Queen to f7.
Huh? Oh.
Ha! Ooh, mate! In 3. Bullshit!
Well, I think that watch scene, where they run into each other, a Solari and the little squad of GM pilots and the Gundam pilot, when they accidentally run into each other when the Zeon squad is infiltrating the base, that moment would have been even more impactful if that was really the moment where we learned that the child was the Gundam pilot, right?
Yeah.
Because that little new type like psychic interaction they had, where it's just like, just this realization, they kind of look at each other and they're like, oh, and then you as a viewer, like, oh, the Gundam, this merciless killing machine is a child. And so I think that would have been a more impactful way to introduce it, because we still would have understood that what was going on in that moment, what that meant, without the scene of like, I'm just super smart, because the thing is, new types aren't necessarily like super smart. They just have extremely tuned senses and light psychic abilities. So I felt like that didn't even really fit with the whole.
No,
like,
it was super cringe, man. It was super cringe.
I think they could have left, and it's a little minor nitpick, but like, I think they could have left that 30 seconds out, and then that would have actually had a bigger impact and had a more a harder hitting aha moment, when we realize he's the pilot. Because with that scene where he does that, you're like, oh, he's the pilot. You know,
Yeah.
that's you kind of know right away. But it would have been cool if they would have had that scene then just kind of held that back a little bit for the watch moment, the watch dropping moment. But again, small nitpick, I think, overall.
Yep. Well, that's about it. What this did make me want, as I play MechWarrior 5 Clans, which was just released, is a BattleTech TV show very desperately.
Yeah, I mean, that's another, where do you think they got all that Earth sphere houses and all that kind of stuff? You know, the conflict between Earth and the star Earth people and space people. I wonder where that originated. Yeah, but so that would be cool. Oh, and they have mechs too. That would be cool. But I want a live action Gundam series. I think you should go back and watch the original 1979 Gundam series because it absolutely holds up. The animation is good for its time, I would say. So it's going to look dated, but it's not going to look that bad. It's not janky animation. It's kind of like the best they had at the time, and the story is legitimately very good. So yeah, I would if you're looking,
which is
for
also on Netflix, by the way. I wasn't unaware of this, but it is actually on Netflix.
And it is, I would say one of the seminal classic science fiction pieces of media out there because of its influence on so much else. I mean, all that mecha anime, not a lot of that would have happened without Gundam. And sure, Gundam wasn't the very first mecha anime by a long shot, right? But like, it was the one that I think really mainstreamed the idea of like war drama mecha stuff. So I think I would recommend everyone goes back and just starts there, and watches that and just goes through the Universal Century. That's what I did. I had a ton of fun doing it, and I didn't feel like it looked too old or anything like that. The story and the characters are compelling enough that you just don't care. It's that good. And I think this show, despite its fumbling on the animation front and the voice acting front and a couple things here and there, I feel like is very worthy to be part of the Universal Century in the Gundam universe. And I think it's a nice little addition into that timeline. Very cool. Bravo.
Yeah, it was fun. And I for me as a non-Gundam fan, if this was a commitment of like 50 episodes, I probably wouldn't recommend it. But because it's 2 hours long, I think that it's really worth your time, actually. So quite good. We are going to continue, I guess, with things made by Japanese studios, at the very least, with Uzumaki, maybe American or Western-led initiatives made by Japanese studios or in partnership with Japanese studios. Uzumaki, I'm a huge Junji Ito fan. I will be rereading Uzumaki before this. Obviously, when we announced that we were going to do Uzumaki at this time, we thought, it was going to be good. And apparently the first episode is quite good, but it was then riddled with production issues and changing studios, which has led to what I've heard is the rest of the series beyond episode 1 maybe not being at the same quality. And that's unfortunate, but we are still going to do it. I have yet to watch any of the episodes, so I'll be doing that in the coming week. But that'll be our next episode as we continue on more modern shows that we've been focusing on. And then beyond that, guys, as we've mentioned, there's a bunch of stuff coming out: Dune Prophecy, Star Wars Skeleton Crew, Arcane, Secret Level, that's going to be coming up in the next couple of months. So all of that will be interspersed with the continuance of our 1980s fantasy movie marathon. So you guys can enjoy that. Thanks for watching Nerd Legion. See you next week.